Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mindset Magic, where we take a look at the connection between mindset, health span, and longevity from multiple perspectives. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Kyle Dietrich, who's the founder of Grounded Idealist, an organization that was built in response to the mass layoffs of public servants in 2025. Kyle's life and Grounded Idealist mission is to empower change makers to continue serving by grounding outer social change in inner transformation. Kyle is a certified empowerment facilitator and trauma-informed leadership coach with more than 25 years of experience leading large-scale peace building and humanitarian assistance programs around the world. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Srini. It's great to be with you.
And with you. And when we first talked about potentially doing this, I remember thinking it would be really great to have a conversation that showcases what your work is, what my work is, so that people can understand if they can gain any value from what we're both doing. But I always love these conversations because I feel like they also reveal points of intersection that I've not anticipated, especially because they're so unplanned. I think I'd like to start out by, and I'd love this to be a conversation more than just my asking you questions. So I'd love to, let's sort of engage in the intersection of where both of our philosophies merge. And I think one of the things that stood out to me is your sort of understanding of the importance of inner peace as it relates to not just how we feel, but social change. And I'm curious what brought you to this place in your life where you became so interested in inner peace and its impact on social change.
That's a beautiful invitation to start. Thank you. And thank you for this conversation. And also just to you for supporting our community over the past year and the workshop you led and other resources you made available. So I'll talk more in a minute about the work we do as an organization. But to your question, from an early age, I was a creative who didn't choose the artistic or creative path. I was a photographer and a filmmaker and have woven those things into the deep social change work that I've kind of embarked on since college, so 25 plus years. I think the fork in the road, or the deep realization for me, was really working in places like Haiti. I was in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake where almost 300,000 people died, and deeply devastating, and doing this humanitarian assistance work. Before that, I was in a Central African country called Burundi, which south of Rwanda, east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, was going through a 12-year civil war. I was with the UN peacekeeping mission there. Anyway, I've worked in famines, I've worked in conflicts, I've worked with extremists in really kind of tender parts of the human story as they are reaching kind of a crossroads, and looking at how, as these paradigms of international development or social change, which are all very driven by the West, and we have to admit they're kind of Eurocentric in their models for how we look at change and development. But I think as I was an implementer and a practitioner, leading programs, building teams, deeply embedded in communities that were going through really hard transitions, the work was meaningful, what we call the programs, the projects, the efforts, but the how of the individuals doing the work was often misaligned with those deeply transformative missions that people were there to do. And so then I started to just sort of realize, both with myself and my own consciousness and my ability to hold complexity or to understand my own level of nervous system and emotional regulation and dysregulation, and what those things that we don't even talk about in these environments, what they are ultimately contributing to the communities that I'm there to support and empower and restore through either crisis response work or education or health or anything. And so then you start to extrapolate this to kind of every role, that whether it's a teacher in a classroom and their level of kind of self-awareness and self-regulation, to a health worker, to anybody, a police officer, and how they interact with a really complex environment really deeply depends on their level of self-contact and self-regulation and stress management and like how they relate to people and make sense of moments and communicate. And so all of these things are very universal, and yet we're doing something wrong because we very much focus on the external and the what and not the how, and really building the capacity and what I would say the consciousness of the individuals within those complex systems, and how they can do work in a way that doesn't just accomplish the goals of the work, but they are actually transmitting a level of coherence through the work. And that's the sort of most important thing as I step back as somebody who's worked in peace building for many, many years. And I look at, we all know, we look at the levels of kind of social fragmentation, polarization, and we think about what is it going to take to get us back. And one of the things is being more embodied, right? Having deeper self-knowledge about how we show up into these really hard times, slowing down, cultivating inner stillness. And so this is a long answer to respond to a beautiful question, but I just started to do more of my own inner work so that I could relate to moments differently, so that I could presence things differently and not just focus cognitively or analytically on the change that I was seeking to do, but actually on what I was broadcasting or transmitting with my presence as a leader.
Well, one of the things that I'm struck by, and it's sort of not a direction I was thinking we would go in, but it's one of the many sort of directions I think about, is there's an interesting contrast about how I experience you. So I experience, I think, your equanimity, but I experience it as a result of some kind of very skillful and artful management of your libido. And I'm interested to understand, because I think it's something I myself, I'm not really very skilled at doing. Like I feel like my moments of equanimity are fueled by a kind of libidinal connection with the world. But I'm intrigued by how you experience your own libido and how you manage your libido through the lens, how you think about this libido through the lens of equanimity.
It's a beautiful observation, and I'll answer, and then I want to make sure I understand what you mean also by libido and equanimity, because these are kind of terms that you, as a clinical practitioner, myself as somebody who's a layperson, might sense differently. But let me answer it this way. I am often told, as a coach, as a facilitator, as somebody who's convening large groups, of my presence, of what you referred to as equanimity. And I think people assume that I have a level of inner peace. The reality is I'm a fire sign, whether that means anything or not, but I have sort of a deep and steady fire that I have understood and learned how to really calibrate and regulate and turn up and down wherever I need.
How do you do that?
So it's a level of what I would call kind of spiritual presence and confidence, is that I'm rarely in situations where I don't feel that I can show up as an equal, right? We are all equal. I believe this deeply. And I think we all struggle with confidence and meeting moments and what I would describe as stepping into our power in moments. It doesn't mean I don't feel it. Like I feel my heart rate now. I can feel the flush or the temperature in my body, but this is me just attuning to my body and listening to what is emerging physiologically and in my brain, but also just the ability to calibrate. We call titration, right? In coaching is the ability to kind of titrate. And I don't always get this right, but meeting a moment with exactly what it needs, plus a little bit so it can expand. And so I live based on a lot of philosophies and principles we don't have time to get into. And I would love to have that conversation with you. But one of them is what I call a principle of complementarity, which is to think about in any given interaction, whether it's two people or hundreds of people, what's the thing that is going to help that interaction evolve and advance to a higher level of consciousness and frequency and operation, right? And understanding.
Well,
And
that's
so
why I
there's
asked you that question. I asked you that question because I thought if I ignore this question,
yeah,
we're going to go on a theoretical
yeah,
road that I think is not going to acknowledge the fact that there is a relationship between equanimity and libido. By equanimity, I'm speaking to a kind of even-mindedness, so
right.
a non-ruffled mind. And by libido, I mean an energy that
That's
gives rise to things like sexuality, vitality,
right.
uh, all those things. It's interesting to me that the spiritual world is so connected to the heights of libido.
That's
And I
right.
think a lot of people dissociate from libido when they're thinking about how to be more spiritual. They're like, no,
No.
no, that energy is somewhere else. Like that's about worldly energy. But I feel like you're an embodiment, especially you described the rationale for connecting individuals with society as being as having an embodied presence. But you are an embodied presence of whatever this libido is being being channeled in the world into peace work. And so there's something about the contrast of that I think a lot of people it's just like simply beyond their access. Like they're either in the like wild and wonderful world or they're in the spiritual world, and there isn't this way of bringing both together. And part of why I brought this up was not only because of what your presence is like, but and I can't even see your hands. But when you started to use your hands, I was like, "What's happening here? Like what? Like
Yeah.
there's something
Yeah.
he's doing. Like what's going on here? Like there's and it's like so when you are feeling someone's presence in that way, I feel you're opening to the fact that, and what I think I'm doing in being open in this way is I'm opening to the fact that there's something kind of weird about thinking of ourselves as being separate. And
Mm.
there's something about understanding that beyond the illusion of the body, there's the connection of energy.
Mm.
In my last book, Tinker Dabble Doodle Try, I pointed to the fact that human consciousness may be more like beads in a chain than an isolated buoy out at sea. So I don't just see you as one buoy that's like hanging out with me in an ocean and I'm like, hey, Kyle buoy, like what's going on? It's like I feel like we are beads in a chain of consciousness and that consciousness is flowing through us. And that the more we can connect to our identities as being that particular architecture, the less we will feel separated from each other and the less we will be in pain, because I feel like a path toward non-dualism
Mm.
is a path toward the end of suffering.
Mm.
Because suffering to me is what cloaks bliss. I'm a firm believer that our fundamental nature is bliss.
Mm.
And I'm not in a blissful state all the time, but I use that as a frame of reference to remind myself that if I'm not in that state, I've lost contact with
Yeah.
something that is true. For you, how much has truth, like, well, what do you think most people struggle with when you are coaching them? What do you think they are struggling with when they are struggling with the truth? Because it's very hard to be truthful in the world. It's the individual and society,
Mm.
and they're often at odds with each other.
Mm.
What for you? What do you do when someone is like, I am like this, and some of these things I can express, but most of me is just not acceptable in society.
Right. I think one of the greatest gifts we can give other people is receiving them fully. And I think despite all of our ways of connecting in the world, online, in person, there are just so many curated opportunities. When you ask people, whether it's in a group or in a one-on-one setting, like who really receives you, who truly receives you, it's not that many people. And so what I try to do as a coach or in this conversation, any conversation, is to be a walking invitation for people to both slow down, right, arrive in their bodies, but also just to vibrate at a different frequency. Because I think again, as a coach, I'm an okay coach. I know a lot of great coaches, but one of the things I think I help people with is just slowing down to feel and gain access to things, because we over-index so much in our lives, particularly in the West, on cognitive, analytical, intellectual ways of knowing, and I believe those are secondary. I believe our original form of intelligence is deeply intuitive, and we kind of unlearn it with time because we're told, oh, that no, oh, and we sort of steer people. And like any ability, language and any ability, we kind of slowly erode it and rely on it less. But our ability to sense each other and to intuitively understand each other and to relate to each other is for me the primary thing I would like us to return to. But with age, it sort of is the opposite happens. So I see a lot of people struggle with limiting beliefs. You know, when we look at the disconnect between the life that we think we want, right, versus the life we have, we are affirming not what we want to believe, but we are affirming what we believe. Like, this goes to your course in law of attraction and all of these ideas. And a lot of people are stuck in affirming and manifesting what they actually believe, not what they want to believe. And so in an intimate space or a confidential space of coaching or teamwork, it's to help people understand the quality of their inner soil, the architecture of their core beliefs, an intimate, examination of their limiting beliefs, and how those are showing up without judgment, right? In deeply trauma-informed ways, so they understand all of these things serve them at some point. They are epigenetically, historically kind of adaptive forms of intelligence in their own life and through their own lineage that run through them, but might not be serving them anymore. And so we can take a time to slow down, gain access to new information, kind of hit refresh, so we can really have a clear, clean look today at what serves us and what we need. But the best way of anything, like the simple advice that I often give, is just like, we have to slow down to do any of that. To access what is possible, we have to have a degree of stillness and a degree of integration. It can't come from the frenetic doing.
Well, I think of a sports metaphor. Like when I play tennis, I feel like I play tennis much better when I'm not being frenetic about something. When I'm just relaxed, even when I'm running fast. You can run fast and relax, or you can run fast and...
Because you're flowing and not in a state of like planning and cognitively thinking. You're responding. And that's, for me, that's also rooted in intuitive intelligence. It's like sensing at a level like physiological attunement and alignment, presence that allows you to move so quickly and intuitively.
Well, so many things strike me about what you're saying. One of them is that when you're asking people to slow down so that they can begin to embrace possibilities, right? I think you're intuitive to make the connection to the course and the law of attraction, because the law of attraction course is about reprogramming the brain to be able to give it different inputs so that it creates a predictive architecture that is more in concert with what you want than what you think you have or where you are.
Right.
And I think that sounds obvious. It's like, oh yeah, that's great. Like, what do you mean? Like, I should just tell myself, I'm happy and I'm wealthy and I'm healthy, and when I don't feel any of those things. And it's like, well, I think you want your brain to do the work for you. So you want it to have a vision of who you are. And I think there's in some ways, an uncanny connection between the Grounded Idealist and Richard Boyatzis' work on the importance of the ideal self in helping us navigate toward our goals. Because I think there is something about what that ideal is that matters. But there's another piece to this, which I'm curious to know how you think about this. I have moments when I feel like I do things, I meditate, I am still, I am relaxed, I'm thinking thoughts that feel like they're more in control. Mm-hmm. But my fundamental belief is that there's something way outside of even intuition that is what our fundamental nature is. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, there's one sutra that says, even when you have achieved complete control of the mental turbulence, there are impressions that remain. They give that the word samskara. And samskara is, the habits of thinking. I see myself doing this all the time. I'm like, oh my God, how am I in the same situation again? And I'm like, that's because even though I tried to change something cognitively and I tried to change something analytically, the impression has remained to define me. And the hard part is when you're trying to be grounded in who you are, you often ground to the past, but the past is where the trauma is. And so grounding, from your perspective, is at a superficial level. I understand what that is, but when you examine the implications of what grounding is there's a paradox between what I sense you are talking about, because when you're talking about when you're grounded, it feels like you're flying or floating or something. It doesn't seem like it's attached to the ground. Now, can you say more about what groundedness is for you?
I can. I think, and I feel pretty deeply, there's a difference between what you know, Srini, and what I know, Kyle, and with what wants to be known. Okay, that's one thing. What you feel, what I feel, and what wants to be felt. And so this is absolutely bigger than just my ability to intuitively understand you and what you're saying. There is what wants to come through, and that's a different level of metacognition, or even beyond that, of just holding space spiritually. There's a Sufi story about becoming a hollow reed for the divine breath to flow through. And so we have the
That's what I think you are, by the way. I don't experience you. I can't even tell if you're talking. I feel like you're channeling something from somewhere else.
And I can't even respond to that because of how it's said, because of who I am and my own impersonal way of being human. But that probably is a separate, thing we can come back to. I created the idea of Grounded Idealist 15 years ago. And I did nothing with it. It just came to me and I sat with it. I created an email account, and that was the one we used when we had people sign up for this. We had 3,000 coaches sign up to volunteer and support people. We had thousands and thousands of workers sign up to receive pro bono coaching after being, furloughed and fired from public service jobs. All of these beautiful change makers doing the work that we need to do. But let me come back to your question. There is a tension in the name Grounded Idealist that's very deliberate. The grounding that I talk about isn't just me grounding in my body, it's grounding in the roots of the bigger ecosystem, which are both earthly and not earthly. It's the roots of the natural cadence and rhythm of life that we are so misaligned from living in sync with. There's an ability to come into some degree of harmony with that natural rhythm of life, with our own natural rhythm, with our own deep interdependence, not interconnection, interdependence. I say it this way, we belong to each other. That interdependence has to be a primary understanding or truth or value for us to be able to operate and solve any of the issues that we care about in the world. At the core of them, we talk about drivers versus symptoms of problems. At the core of our social problems, I believe the key driver is that we've lost our sense that we belong to each other. That what I do to you. And that if you cannot be your full self, I cannot be my full self. If I cannot be you, it's a mutuality. Dr. King spoke about this. And we are wrapped up in this same garment of identity and destiny. But we are also of this earth and not of this earth. We didn't come and colonize this earth. We have emerged from like any natural, organic matter, but we are part of a bigger, vast, expanding, unknown mystery that is deeply important to how we are wired and how we are to show up in this life of deep mystery. But so much of that mystery is not anything we talk about. And so for me, it means grounding in that natural rhythm. It means grounding in the mystery, the deep interconnectedness, like roots that connect trees and sends, energy and nutrients to each other when one is like, we're all deeply missing that interdependence because we can't see it the way we can see a tree's roots. And so we need that grounding now more than ever because of all the ways we know, and maybe we don't even know, that we are fragmented, fractured, disrupted. And then the idealism is more self-evident. It's this sense of we are here to dream. We are here to flourish and become, right? And live in a state of deep possibility. And so the tension between being grounded, again, not just in ourselves, but also continuing to strive and to believe and to dream and not be rooted in scarcity, but deep possibility. And so we want people, again, bringing this back to the organization I founded just a year ago. The idea is to take all of these people who have dedicated their lives to serving, to service, which for me that means at some level they're operating from a higher stage of consciousness, because they have decided to dedicate their life, their studies, to compromise their health and self-interest to serve others, whether they're a humanitarian or a scientist working on a vaccine or a crossing guard or a firefighter or a soldier, right? There's a level at which service is hardwired into who we are as human beings. And now at a time when what I experience of the world right now is a meta crisis, is a compounding, accelerating level of deep structural change across all of the issues, the social, political, environmental issues that we care about. The people that we most need at the front lines, at the tip of the spear addressing those issues, are the same ones that were let go from their jobs. All of these millions of people in the past year have lost their jobs. Local organizations, NASA aerospace engineers, park rangers, health workers, educators, it goes on and on, judges. And so we have all of them in our network. And so we're helping them as they transition in this unexpected turbulence that's deeply politicized, this moment that we live in, at least in the US, but it's global. There's a risk that all of these people don't have the confidence and the pathways to continue serving, and that has big, implications and disruptions for our future. And so, but I, again, kind of tying this all together with your question and our kind of theory of change as an organization is what they do next, what we all do next, cannot just be rooted in the same old ways of doing. It has to be rooted in this idea that outer change comes from inner transformation. Because if it's not embodied, and that's where the grounding comes in.
So there's two separate lines of thinking I have here. One is what you said just reminded me of an experience that I had, because I think of service. I don't know if I think of it differently with this. It has a different resonance in me. I think because my life has it's been about that. I don't really think of myself as serving, because I think it evokes this whole master-slave dialectic, which takes us down a whole other path. And I feel like
that's the root of the word service. So that's a helpful distinction. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think if I am a server, then I'm actually putting myself in a position of power relative to the person who needs me. And so there's that, which is sort of
that's a great point. Yeah, go ahead. That's great
element to think about. I also I think that as turbulent as it is to lose a job, the opportunity is monumental.
Right.
I think when I work with corporations and I work with people within organizations, a lot of the questions that are around, how do I become more resilient? How do I feel more agile? How do I feel more creative? Some of the bottom line is if you leave the organization, you'll feel like that. But the question is, how do I feel more like that within the constraints of the organization? And I remember, so I was very lucky to have trained at McLean Hospital, at Harvard Medical School, at a time when, there was incredible luxuries. So I had my own office in a separate building that was dedicated to trainees. And after that, I had an office that was a clinical office where I could see patients. And then managed care happened to swoop in and change how the way the systems were. And then I saw somebody measuring my office one day. They just literally came into my office while I was there, and they started measuring. I was like, what are you measuring this for? Because no one had told me that they were going to be using this office for something else. And I was immediately astounded that there was such a change in culture in this organization. And how can someone not tell me that they're going to be doing this? And I went to speak to a trusted mentor who said to me, I'm just telling you that you should just get your own office. And I was like, why should I get my own office if I'm working in this hospital and I'm working there? I should have this. And he was like, get your own office. You will see that it will transform your life. Mm. So I got my own office down the street, and I was kind of kicking and screaming along the way because I was like, I don't know what's happening in the culture of this organization. And when I got my own office, I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. Like it's so nice to not be dependent and to be afraid that someone's going to be coming into my office to measure my office the next day. And I continued to stay at Harvard, where I had amazing gifts, mentors, really beautiful things that happened there. But when I left, I left, a lot of it was circumstance. My mentors had decided they were moving to Utah. They invited me to go with them. I didn't want to move away from Boston at the time. And so I thought, well, I'll just have to go off my own because I don't see anywhere else that I actually want to be working here. And when I went off on my own to become an entrepreneur, it's really horrifying in many ways to be an entrepreneur because you don't really know what you're doing most of the time. True. But what is really amazing is that it gives you an opportunity to find your own balance in the world. Because when you have a job, you're relying on the job to do something, but the job is also taking something away from you. It's taking away it's basically giving you side wheels for the rest of your life. And when you remove those side wheels on the metaphoric bicycle of life, you're suddenly in yourself. Now, the work you do, I think, is tremendously helpful in helping people bridge what happens from the side wheels to just riding a bicycle the way you might enjoy riding a bicycle. Because, you get hurt a lot when you're transitioning from the job to the other side. But the process of being able to adapt to that, it seemed to me that I wasn't sure if you knew of this model, but much of what you're saying is described by a model. It's called Reed's model of self-transcendence, which is it's a nursing model that basically said people transcend inward by going more deeply within themselves. They transcend outward by connecting with others. They transcend upward by connecting with awe, spirit, or God. Right. And they also hop off the timeline when they're transcending. And it seems like all four of those things in that model are what you're talking about. That transcendence is an inward movement as much as it is a connection. I couldn't help but think of Lenny Kravitz's song, I Belong to You, and You Belong to Me. Too. There's that, what you describe as belonging is both a very human sentiment, but it's another one of those things that's confusing, because can you really belong to something if it is not separate from you? And can you really belong to someone if they...
But if people don't know that they do, then we have to remind them, right? I don't believe in the separation and the separateness, but when we have architected our entire lives that way, I think it's worth reminding people of this.
Firstly, it's much better to be in that state than to be in a completely isolated state. Even from a health perspective, there's a tremendous amount of research to show that loneliness is at least as impactful as cholesterol and other factors in morbidity,
smoking,
and mortality.
That's right.
So this notion of belonging is interesting to me from a number of perspectives. People have often asked me, because I was born in South Africa, and it's a very interesting feeling to belong in a country where there's apartheid, because you're thinking that the message is that you don't belong, and I never felt like I didn't belong, and it's an interesting feeling. Even Afrikaans is my second language, and Die Stem is the national anthem. And I loved the song and still do. And my brother would say to me, like, stop, my my political activist friends are coming home. You can't be singing the song. And I was like, well, how come it's okay when they're not there? You don't mind because I'm being me. But when they come, you would like me to not be me, which I will do for you because I didn't want him to be embarrassed. But it always made me think, is this just a defense against what is a fundamental injustice? Or is this, is this an approach that Richard Bach described, which I mentioned in a TEDx talk that I gave, which is the mark of your ignorance is the depth of your belief in injustice and tragedy. What the caterpillar called the end of the world, the master called the butterfly. And I think whatever world you're in that seems like a caterpillar world, there is a butterfly possibility. I think you were talking about limiting beliefs earlier on. And I think this capacity to evolve into another version of ourselves is what is called for right now. Like, especially in this age of AI, in a period where nobody knows what to do next. I would say the first thing to do is not to try to keep up with AI, because there are ways in which we will never keep up with it. I think what we owe ourselves is to take advantage of our creativity to be able to reinvent ourselves over and over again. Because reinvention is it's fun. It's like wearing costumes. It's basically like being in a play. You can make reinvention fun. I am interested in a contrast that. So at a fundamental level, I feel very connected to you around mission and vision. Yeah. I think the way we communicate that is different, and it's different, I think, like by necessity. I might communicate it more like you if I was talking to somebody like me. So I am, and I'm always in the same way that I was interested in whatever differences existed in apartheid, which honestly fueled some of the most amazing transformations in my existence. And I said this to someone earlier, but I feel very, very much like I don't feel like I'm at a greater disadvantage than any other human being. I think being a psychiatrist, being a human is a pretty hard thing. And I think it's hard no matter where you are, no matter how much money you are, no matter how fit you are. It's not an easy thing until you give up this clinging to bodily life. Mm-hmm. In the small moments I have where I'm not clinging to that, I'm like, what are you talking about? Being a human is a breeze. It's kind of amazing. But I would like that to infiltrate more of my life. Mm-hmm. I would like it to I would like what you were talking about, this thing that comes through you. I am interested, and I know that it's a challenge to your humility, but meet me here, please. I want to know where you think this information is coming from. Is there a place, or do you think of it differently?
Have you looked much into this idea of, it's more than an idea, but we'll call it an idea, of the Akashic records?
Yes, yeah.
Right, so there are some things that we simply can't put to words because they transcend cognitively what we even understand, let alone our ability to touch them, to name them, or to communicate them. There are so many layers at which we're kind of removed from pure reality, and that's what we talk about, right? And so this idea of the Akashic records to me resonates deeply, that there's this almost eternal compendium of information that we all have access to, almost like we're standing in a river, but we can touch the past, the present, and the future in that river because the way we have a limited understanding of how time flows. For me, again, with my life, I felt this way since I was a kid. So there's very little aging in my life. There's developing and maturation and kind of ego transformation into sort of adult development shifts, perspectives, and all the complexity that you get as you move through stages of consciousness. But I've felt the same age and had the same access to information and this umbilical cord type connection to human suffering and to people deeply beyond my lived felt experience. And it's the same with everything. And so you ask me kind of where does this come from? I don't know that I can try to answer. It's but I'm going to try not to dance too much with this question, but let me dance a little bit. Like we can't touch the present or the magic and the mystery of this present moment. And what is the present? The present is a present, continuous, eternal moment. It's all there is. As I say a word, that moment is now suddenly in the past, but that is all there is the present, continuous eternity, right? Timeless. It continues going, whether we're here or not, my breath, my life, you. There's something in this moment that we can only touch and access when our past has been integrated. And this is why I did a lot of work and spent a lot of time with my teachers like Thomas Hubel, Amy Elizabeth Fox, and others to really understand trauma and collective and intergenerational trauma. Because we carry around the past, all of this unintegrated past, we inherit from our ancestors. We have, from, most of who we are is from our adverse childhood experiences, and kind of a learning and unlearning, grappling with these things that be, the models and the examples of our lives and these crucible moments that defined us. But we carry all of that with us. So most of us, what percent present are we in this present eternal moment? 5%, 10%? I would say the majority of who we are, it's like dragging around this giant suitcase of the past that's unintegrated, or, right, ideating about this future state and all of these different scenarios. And so whatever you're asking, the only way I can touch it is by finding a level of stillness and integration within myself, so that I can connect with this, whether it's the Akashic records, whether it's this kind of thing that we all have access to and yet have learned to not trust. I go back to the intuitive intelligence. I go back to, right, there's the fascinating, whether you disagree it or not, a podcast called the Telepathy Tapes, and talking about nonverbal speakers and talking about others that have access to different levels, particularly children, because that's what they relied on pre-speech or without speech. And so, yeah, there's other stuff I want to talk about, but it doesn't come from me. And so you use the word humility, and I've had a difficult relationship with confidence and humility my whole life, because if you compliment me, I don't really receive it because it's not about me. I can hold it to benefit you and your need to be received in complimenting me, but it doesn't have a place to land because it's not really about me. And I know this probably doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but I receive it, and it's a beautiful, and I bow and honor and thank people all the time. And I receive it, but it's ultimately something deeper that I'm able to channel or to hold or to presence with my life. And I'm not always there. I'm human. I have lots of behavioral challenges and moments of deep dysregulation and anger, because this moment deserves anger. There's a lot of outrage, and I'm human, and I deal with that. I have relationships with lots of all the layers and complications that relationships bring. I have melancholy, deep melancholy, because of the state of the world and this deep disconnect, Srini, with what I feel as this pure divine love and state of possibility in me and my heart. And you talked about this, the self-transcendence model, Reed's model, versus that which I know and feel is true. And then when I look outside myself and the state of the world, the disconnect between those, and we all have deep cognitive dissonance because we need it to function in this world. Otherwise, we become crazy, essentially. And so I have a lot of melancholy because of the disconnect and my inability as one human to affect large-scale change and collective healing around things that I think are going to advance us as a planet, as a society.
So I both believe and don't believe anything that I say, which is sort of
That's beautiful. What an honest thing to say. We have to hold all of it lightly. Of course we do.
So whenever I have a point of view, I have an opinion of something, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to say this, but I actually think the opposite of it. And now,
oh God, yes.
which I think the opposite. Like I don't.
Yes.
For a while, I'm going to pretend to have one point of view, but I
Sure.
don't only have one point of view. So I don't feel melancholy about the world at all.
Mm.
I see what you are noticing, and it makes complete sense to me that you feel melancholy about the world. But in the context of what you were saying about service, I
Mhm.
think for me to change anything in the world, even though I agree with you that I alone cannot change that thing,
Yeah.
I think I have to hold on to whatever my peace is, and whatever my joy is, and whatever my bliss is, so I can make a contribution to the energy that can transform the world. But that is a retrospective realization. I don't
Sure.
think I actually do that. I think I'm just like that, right? And I'm like a weird contrast. Like I feel like I have a lot of fun in the world, and the world I think is kind of amazing, and I love the fun I have, and I'm also like constantly tortured. So it's like I feel like I don't know how I can feel so stressed and happy, but I do. And so melancholy, so I feel like maybe one way I take in the chaos that you're talking about is through the stress that I feel that I make personal that is not necessarily personal. So in that sense, maybe I experience what you experience, but take it in differently through a different portal.
Yeah.
But the piece about the reason I don't, so there are a couple of factual reasons I'm a little dubious about suffering. One is suffering has become an economic sort of portal. So whenever if people, I am qualified in one of those domains. So I make money from people suffering. So I can't not be aware of that. I'd like to get paid because I feel like I've worked hard and I have a set of expertise and it's a
Sure.
decent thing. But you cannot not be aware that if the world's suffering were to end, I would not have a job.
Right.
So that's a conflict of interest that's there somewhere. It's sort of like I have to be aware of that. There's nothing I'm going to actually do about that. But I've often wondered to myself, like, is it a job? Can this be a job? Like, what if this were, and I have my own thoughts about nonprofits. I feel like I've worked in very few nonprofits that are actually nonprofits. So I feel like nonprofit is sort of a way of making money. It's just a different way of making
It's a business with a different legal structure and business
money.
model.
Right.
It's yeah.
But I was going to say to you that there's a paper. I'm not sure if I shared this paper with you, but it's a paper I've wanted to discuss with someone like you on that's Lacan and trauma and causality, a psychoanalytic critique of post-traumatic stress or growth. And what this paper points out is that Lacan was very concerned about the commercialization of trauma. The fact that trauma had actually originated. So I'll read you a little bit about this. The term trauma has become something of a cultural lightning rod since the mid-20th century, attracting enormous attention in the fields of cultural and social theory. We have seen the rise of the discipline of trauma studies, which touches on everything from the Holocaust to Rwanda, from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. Regarding the psi disciplines, we have seen early acknowledgments of traumatic memory, links between shell shock and the so-called war neuroses, and more recently, the recognition of Vietnam syndrome and then post-traumatic stress disorder. Like addiction, the scope of PTSD has expanded considerably in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. The DSM-5 also implies the transmissibility of trauma beyond direct personal experience of it. One can now be traumatized by witnessing or even hearing of the traumas suffered by others. This has led to pilots of remote drones being diagnosed with PTSD, despite being physically far from the front line in the new conditions of postmodern warfare. Linked to this contagion effect, perhaps, there are now innumerable online screening tools and even apps enabling anyone to self-diagnose PTSD. This is the one that really caught my attention. Given the US military budget set aside for compensating affected soldiers, as well as equivalents in the private health insurance sector, there's a certain market in trauma. Without at all denying that there's real human suffering behind what the term tries to capture. On the contrary, in fact, I want to describe this contemporary proliferation as trauma talk. Trauma talk involves invoking the charged signifier trauma in ways that have concrete consequences in the world, precisely thanks to the absence of a consistent referent. Now, I think you get the general direction of this article. It's interesting from a number of perspectives. So one way in which it's interesting is that most people with trauma do not suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. They actually have post-traumatic recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I, like the author of that article, believe that human suffering exists. The lens of trauma, I think, is helpful in a moment when one requires reassurance and acknowledgement of what one has gone through. But trauma as a perpetual lens, I think, can perpetuate the idea or that someone cannot recover from this wound or injury. And the reason I'm so enthusiastic about asking you this question is because I feel some kind of adoration for you in this interview. And so I feel like, what a fun thing to think about with any listener who's thinking, who's this happy guy and who's the melancholy guy? And who's the guy who's like saying, the world is traumatized. The other guy is like, come on, dude, let's go out. And there are those two kinds of people in the world. And what I'm saying to you is that I feel like I'm both kinds of people.
Exactly. We are both people.
So so it's easy to polarize when one person is taking, like if you came in and said, whatever, this trauma nonsense, like I don't care. I would be like, there's like a large degree of human suffering in the world. I might say the opposite. Sometimes it's a defense to ignore the trauma. Mm-hmm. I had a mentor who would constantly say to me, I don't understand. He was from Texas. And he'd be like, I don't understand how you're not traumatized by this whole apartheid thing. And I was like, I'm not. When I wrote an essay on this for the Psychoanalytic Association Award, everybody was like, Americans are so guilty, just feed them the apartheid thing, you'll win it in no time. And I was like, no, I'm going to say what I actually felt. I felt aroused by the vicarious interactions with things that I was prohibited to interact with, and people I was prohibited to interact with. And my arousal, I will accept, could be a form of defense. And in some ways, it is run loose in the world because I'm so excited by art, by science, by technology, by people. It's a reason that I think I don't receive the melancholy in that way. But there are moments in your life when, like with the death of my mother, for example, where I feel like I really was like shaken by what there was. And I was like, oh, this is like what melancholy feels like. But even then and now, I believe that we have time on earth we all have the opportunity not to have some kind of rebirth. Mm-hmm. And I would love that. But I'm caught between these two identities I'm talking about. There's a part of me that feels like, well, in order to do that, then you got to have practice and non-attachment, and you have to figure out how your practice can be consistent and uninterrupted and in all earnestness. And you have to figure out that when you are doing that, your non-attachment is not to be aloof, but to recognize the fundamental non-duality of existence. And then when a friend is like, hey, come down to the pool, I'm like, yeah, maybe I want to go and have a margarita. But then I'm like, oh my God, now I'm giving up my practice. Do you ever, for yourself, think about these two worlds and how to live in them or between them? And what's your response to, when I was reading the part about trauma to you, what were you feeling and thinking?
It's like I'm standing on a path when there are 20 divergent ways we could go in this conversation. Let me say a couple things and then hold me accountable if I don't answer in the way you're looking for. But one, you have a fundamental curiosity and wonder about you, which allows you, which I do actually think is tied to levels of consciousness. And so you're able to live life in a way that's not just through the lens of what it means to you or how it affects you. Right? Some people, we live and everything is about me. Like I listen to somebody and how it benefits me versus I listen to somebody and I sit in their curiosity and like their processing versus I listen to somebody and I'm like, what's trying to come through this person? These are all stages of consciousness and stages of listening. And so you have this fundamental awe and wonder, curiosity to life. And so, of course, I lost my mother too 13 years ago, and life contracts and like things become different. And obviously, like, the emotional landscape of my life shifted and the way I understand. And we can talk about grief, because I actually think grief ties back to what I'm helping people process now, back to my work. But I'll come back to that. To the question about trauma, there's a lot to say with very little time. I think we can frame these things in different ways. We can frame things as trauma, or as fragility, or as resilience. My work for many, many years was around violence and conflict. And it was always this fascinating tension between, when you look, like Pinker and other, social scientists and people who look at violence and trends, they talk about violence levels are actually quite decreased since the end of World War II, and especially after the 90s with Srebrenica and Rwanda. Those were kind of blips, but in general, violence is decreased. And yet I would push back and say the experience of violence, the physiological experience of violence, is greatly increased. How do you measure that? Because of, again, like sensitivity and empathy and information and the way it flows and the way it affects our lives and our sense of safety. And so I think we have a world that has made a lot of us deeply fragile. And there are a lot of ways that these concepts are helpful. We talk about psychological safety. And then, of course, for some people, it just enables fragility in teams, because we have a misunderstanding of what it means to have hard conversations or build the trust needed to get through hard things. You're not just going to suddenly get rid of hard things. And so we have to have a different understanding of resilience than we do now, for example. I think resilience is important, but I think resilience in the way we understand it now, and I'm a little off topic, but is we're essentially externalizing our own well-being, or externalizing the requirement of institutions to make life safe and healthy to the individual. And so individuals who live through wars and are, displaced, or, sexual violence, or the collective trauma of firing hundreds of thousands of people from service-oriented jobs. This is a collective trauma. And we just expect them to be resilient. Not all of them, again, to your point, and I will push back, are going to see this as an opportunity, because it wasn't something that they chose. It was done with cruelty. And I mean, there are even articles about this administration talking about they were trying to inflict mass trauma on public servants. And it worked. And so when I support people, I'm going to kind of, again, tie this back to my work for a second. We have to recognize that people are in a state of grief. And I would say trauma. And it's not just them, it's their families, it's their communities, it's all the communities that benefited from these programs. There's a sudden loss. And so let me bring this back to, we both lost our moms. I don't know your relationship, nor will I presume to understand your relationship with your mom. For me, I could take all the people I've known in my entire life, and my mom was often sort of equal to everybody else, because she was a single mom who raised me, and I love my dad, and I love my siblings, and I love everybody else, and I have a daughter. I love being a dad. But my mom was that important to me. And so when I lost her, the love, we talk about grief is unexpressed love, because love is a force of life that coheres us, activates us, gives us purpose and connection and meaning. And when that doesn't have a place to go, because that person, that soul in a physical form is no longer there, what happens to that thing that flows from me? So it's the same with people who've lost their jobs, who've lived in a mission-driven, purpose-oriented, service-oriented existence, and suddenly don't have a place to pour in their love, their essence, their being. It becomes unexpressed love. And you happen to have an entire sector of people who are often not used to, as we say on the airplane, put your mask on yourself before putting it on somebody else. They're used to putting the mask on other people, because that's how they're oriented, externally, supporting and serving. And so now we have grief. We have the thing that they're used to pouring their love and life into doesn't exist. And we have to help them not only meet the base of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like basic needs. They're oriented by the tip of the pyramid of self-actualization and becoming and all these great, beautiful things that we want them to continue. But we have to get them in the process to also turn the mask on themselves and say, okay, this is a real opportunity for me to completely transform, to reimagine my life and my dreams and my purpose and my values and my strengths. And so that's why we exist, because we're sort of trying to create this safety net that allows them to do that in this restorative way, to build repair and restoration before that outward facing energy of transformation, love through actions. And so it's complicated. And I these ideas, I did a session recently with hundreds of pro bono attorneys, immigration attorneys included, who are, on vicarious trauma. But this isn't an isolated thing. We know everybody's struggling with burnout, anxiety, mental health, burnout. All of these things are through the roof. I have a teenage daughter, and I look at our kids. There's the level of stress, anxiety, and our children should be such an indicator of our collective dysfunction that we should be paying more attention, that we are out of balance, that mental health issues, like we really are, that the level of collective dysregulation and all of the things that are trying to tell us, including children, like the future, the things we care about and hold most dear, are like screaming at us to say, like, we're not okay. And so I think it's important that we're having these conversations. But the last thing I want to say, Srini, is these are also, you've worked in this field a long time, but like the first study on PTSD, from my understanding, was 1980. Like the science is still very new of our understanding of these topics. And I think we moved over the 20th century from models of physical health, which accelerated greatly our understanding, to mental health. And now we're in an era of social health. And so we're truly we need different paradigms, different understandings and research studies to understand what that evolution looks like, to think about things in terms of social health. It's, again, back to we belong to each other and the interdependence question. And I don't think we're there. I think we're very young in our understanding of these issues.
Kyle Dietrich, I don't think our conversation is finished by any means. If you would be open to it, I would love to have you back so we can continue this. And just to frame some of the questions, I'd like to talk about why some people are burnt out and some are not. I would like to talk about, is it truly traumatic when a servant is liberated? Yeah. And I'd like to talk about the paradoxes that came up in this conversation, because I think people like us have the ability to have that discussion. And if we can embody that, we will be solving the very problem that you're talking about.
Just to sit in the paradox, I think, is one of the best things we can do. To say we also, as two people who look at these professionally, personally, we can sit on both sides or all the sides and also come out at the end being like, I don't know, this is what I think today. Some it's going to be helpful for some people and some for someone else, but it's certainty is one of the most dangerous things that we have in the world. And I don't pretend to have it. I'm going to share the truth with which I've experienced it and know it, and deeply grateful for the paradox and the ability to sit in different perspectives in this conversation.
I am too. And before we close out, how can people find you, and would you like to showcase any of the work that you're currently doing so that people are aware?
Sure. I appreciate the invitation. We're on LinkedIn. Our organization is Grounded Idealist. Our website is groundedidealist.co. And we have lots of programs, both for coaches. We're really dedicated to shaping the future of coaching. So we have a membership program called Conscious Catalyst. We're doing exciting new programs with Bob Anderson from Leadership Circle, a trauma-informed coaching program with Amy Elizabeth Fox and Thomas Hubel. You can find out more about those on our website. If you're somebody who's navigating unexpected career transition or really looking to reimagine your professional life, we have a great program called Route to Rise. It's a career navigator program, cohort-based learning, lots of practical things, coaching, live workshops. So we're a startup, and we are excited about, just like we don't have all the answers in this conversation, we love partnerships, we love collaborations. We partner with universities, with local governments, with nonprofits, with tech companies, because we're trying to be of service and find ways of bringing some of these ideas into the organizations and teams and spaces that will help people perform more effectively. And so would love for people to reach out. You can reach out to me directly, Kyle at groundedidealist.co, or through our LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kyle. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your energy, your presence, your perspectives, your intelligence, and your love. It's all very palpable and easy to experience. And if you'd be open to it, I would love to have you back so we can continue the conversation.
I'd love to.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.